Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's CITI program webinar. Today's topic is Beginner's Guide to Being a Sponsor Investigator, and it is presented by Dr. Melissa Scotti. And now just a few quick notes. This webinar will be recorded, and the recording will be available on the CITI program's website. This webinar is also for educational purposes only. It's not designed to provide legal advice or legal guidance. You should consult with your organization's attorneys if you have questions or concerns about any relevant laws and regulations that may be discussed in this webinar. In addition, the views expressed in the webinar are solely those of the presenter. Now let me tell you about today's presenter. Dr. Melissa Scotti is the Senior Compliance Program Manager at Northwell Health. Melissa received a BA and MS in biology from Clark University and a PhD in biology from Indiana University. She completed postdoctoral appointments at University of Wisconsin and the University of Illinois at Chicago. As a researcher, she received a National Research Service Award from the NIH and published over 20 peer-reviewed articles. Melissa transitioned from conducting research to supporting it and has held positions with research support teams at University of Colorado Health, Columbia University Medical Center, and currently Northwell Health. As a member of Northwell's Office of Research Compliance, she provides regulatory and QA and QI support to sponsor investigators. And now I'm going to pass the mic to Melissa.
Thank you for the lovely introduction. Okay, so first things first, I have nothing to disclose. The learning objectives for today's webinar are fairly straightforward given the breadth of the topic. We will define the role of sponsor investigator and what makes that role, and discuss what makes that role so unique and important. We will identify the regulatory responsibilities that sponsor investigators bear. And finally, we'll discuss considerations for study planning, such as study design considerations, leveraging your resources, and working with your research and institutional support services. Let's start off at the beginning. What is a sponsor investigator, and how is the role different than that of an investigator or a sponsor? To do this, we'll first need to know what a sponsor is, and as well as what is an investigator. A sponsor is an individual, company, institution, or organization which takes responsibility for the initiation, management, and financing of a clinical trial. As such, they are responsible for submitting regulatory documentation to the FDA, including IND and IDE applications, which we will discuss more in depth later. Sponsor does not conduct the study unless they are a sponsor investigator. You may be familiar with industry sponsors such as pharmaceutical or device companies. They design the study, they work with the FDA, they supply the investigational product, they hire site investigators, also known as principal investigators or PIs. And then the site PIs conduct the study and the sponsors compensate the investigators and their institutions for the time spent working on the trial. We just spoke to this a bit, but the investigator is an individual who conducts the study. The trial is conducted by a team of individuals at a trial site. The investigator is the responsible leader of the team, may be called a principal investigator. A sub-investigator is any individual member of the clinical trial team designated and supervised by the PI at a trial site to perform critical trial-related procedures and or make important trial-related decisions. Like we did in the previous section, we're going to break this down first by the general responsibilities required of a sponsor and then of an investigator. When we defined sponsor earlier, we noted sponsors take responsibility for the initiation, management, and financing of a clinical investigation and for submitting a lot of the regulatory documentation. So it follows that the sponsor would be charged with most of the study design, logistic, and oversight responsibilities. For example, trial design. Sponsors are responsible for regulatory submissions to regulatory authorities, such as the FDA. They're responsible for ongoing safety evaluations of investigational products. They're responsible for supplying the investigational product, handling data, quality management, ensuring trials are adequately monitored, delegation to and oversight of clinical research organizations if they're used, and for managing study conduct across multiple sites. Now we'll touch on the general responsibilities of the investigator. When we defined investigator previously, we discussed that an investigator is responsible for study conduct. Thus, the responsibilities of the investigator are concentrated more on working with the subjects, administering study drugs and assessments, and collecting data as required by the protocol. For example, The investigator needs to ensure that they themselves, as well as the personnel they will be delegating tasks to, are appropriately qualified and trained. Now that we've discussed what taking on the role of sponsor investigator entails, let's move to talking about what a potential sponsor investigator needs to consider when planning a study and how to get the most out of available resources and support. When deciding on what to discuss in this final section, I reached out to investigators with experience conducting clinical research, as well as those who work in research support and oversight. The following items were commonly cited as areas that either need special attention or are often not considered enough by sponsor investigators when designing their studies. They are identifying adequate resources, outlining their budget, delivering required regulatory submissions, developing study documents, managing investigational product, creating safety and monitoring plans, and implementing quality control and assurance. I really want to focus on the first budget. Prior to spending all the blood, sweat, and tears that will be required to write a protocol, secure approvals, recruit participants, etc., sponsor investigators must make sure that the resources to conduct the work are available, and those also include finances, time, and support, especially time, as no matter how much delegation is done, ultimately the buck stops with the sponsor investigator. If you cannot commit to the project, don't do it. As mentioned previously, one of the responsibilities of a sponsor investigator is to hire, train, and oversee qualified personnel. Let's talk about that a bit in the context of study planning and conduct. One of the first resource considerations for a sponsor investigator is breaking down the tasks and responsibilities that personnel will be charged with. Once that is done, a sponsor investigator must assess whether they currently have individuals who are. We've mentioned data management a few times throughout the talk, but what is it and why is it important? Good data management is necessary to generate high quality data, ensure data are reliable, accurate, secure, and ready for analysis. And it includes all processes for collecting, handling, manipulating, analyzing, and storing data from the start of the study to its completion. Basically, this means you need to have a clear process around procedures for data acquisition, data confidentiality, CRF completion and correction, safety data, monitoring and QA, database closure, database validation, and data storage. Now we are moving into the last leg of the talk, where we will discuss safety and monitoring. Most studies will require a data safety and monitoring plan, or DSMP. A DSMP is a plan designed during protocol development that ensures that there is a process in place for monitoring and assessing data that may affect safety of participants and assesses continued validity and scientific merit of the study. A DSMP should be designed to be commensurate with the risks of the investigation. The following should be part of the plan. Who is doing the monitoring? For example, will the sponsor investigator do the monitoring, or will the study have a medical monitor, independent safety monitor, or perhaps a data safety and monitoring board, or DSMB? Each may be appropriate depending on study type and risk. The plan should include the data or events that will be assessed under the plan, a plan for reporting adverse events, including timeframes. Okay, that was a lot, but after all that, I'm going to try to distill the talk down into a few bullets. 1, sponsor investigators shoulder all study-related responsibilities. 2, ensure you have enough resources necessary to initiate, conduct, monitor, and analyze the study. 3, be familiar with regulatory requirements. 4, work closely with the institutional offices. 5, maintain frequent and open communication with your study team. And 6, have a backup plan. And with that, I've included a list of the abbreviations that I've discussed today in my talk.
I'd like to thank Dr. Melissa Scotti for today's webinar. We'd also like to thank our audience members for joining us today and for their questions. I'd also like to highlight a course that may be of interest to this audience. It's our Biomedical Principal Investigator course. It focuses on key topics essential to the biomedical investigator's role and responsibilities in conducting a clinical investigation of a product regulated by the US FDA. This role-based course covers supervision, delegation, management, reports, and communication for investigators. In closing, I also invite everyone to review our content offerings regularly, as we are continually adding new courses and webinars in various areas of research, ethics, compliance, and professional development.